designing assessment, that's key to any teaching role, any tutorial role. You normally design assessment before you even start planning your lessons because you know where you need to head. When thinking of designing assessments, there's a few things you need to keep in mind. The first is you need to make sure that you are meeting the learning outcomes or the performance criteria if it's a unit standard.
So you need to look very closely at the wording so you can tell whether it's something that needs to be, you need to see the student actually doing, or whether they need to have maybe sat a theory assessment, or maybe some case study work, or there's a few that they have to actually do like displays or presentations, and if that's what the performance criteria says, well that is how you have to assess.
So it's really important to put together opportunities for the students to be able to confidently complete a task that allows them to integrate their own previous work experience, their life experience, and also their own natural personalities.
Okay, so we're designing a practical assessment, for example, a cookery environment. We're looking at what we need to achieve, how we're going to achieve that, and sort of time frames, duration for that. We look at the types of unit standards we want to do. For example, if we're incorporating food safety, knife handling, then some cooking units, and we can actually incorporate those all into a learning session and a design and assessment session as well. What we look at doing is actually integrating assessments to integrate several unit standards or learning outcomes into one session, which can be incorporated through a program.
Probably advice I could give the new tutors when they start out in designing assessments is to try and link it as closely as possible to the curriculum document and the outcomes that needs to be brought across. First thing I would normally look at is pick an assessment that will assess the student's skills, and as well something that's a little bit flexible, something that will actually allow you to have a little bit of room to move in. And usually with the assessment, things students like is if the instructions are very clear. So there always should be an assessment guide with clear instructions telling the students what's expected of them, as well as how they can achieve these goals. Usually I do about at least an A4 page on it. And then I also set up a marking schedule that actually tells the students where they will be assessed, what components of the assessment is going to be assessed, and what the loading are. Which parts are, say for example, worth 10 or 15% or 20%, and how the whole thing gets put together.
It's important for tutors to remember that large amounts of what they are teaching is new information for their adult learners. As a result, they need to slowly add information and requirements one step at a time, or students may become overwhelmed.
I suppose within the hospitality cookery industry, it's an ongoing process. We're learning and embedding those learning skills into the programs. We'll start a student off with a very basic or minimal knowledge of hospitality cookery, and then start implementing those skills in practice. For example, food hygiene, food safety becomes an everyday practice, an everyday component should become natural after a while. Then we look at knife handling skills. We're actually using a knife every day, using them properly, safely, and then from those points using those skills in preparation of food products. So it's an ongoing, continuous part of the program, so within time becomes second nature, supposedly. But if it doesn't, we're actually monitoring along the way and sort of acknowledging, okay, you need to work on these areas, we need to watch what you're doing there. So once again, supervision and assessing through observation as well.
Sometimes you can go into a scenario with students where your expectations are unrealistically high, and I think the reason that happens is that when you come from a particular industry where you've been doing something every day for however many years, you sometimes forget that they come naturally to you, but they're completely and utterly foreign to somebody who's just doing it for the very first time. As a tutor, I think that it's really important to keep a very clear focus on the fact that things that your students will be doing, they've never encountered before, practically. They've never physically done it. As everyday life it may be to you, for them it's completely foreign. So developing the purpose of an exercise and giving them very clear guidelines of each step to be able to achieve a particular task is vitally important. And it's really discover how much detail you need to go into with a student individually through each step to get from one end to the next. So explaining to the student why they are learning what they are learning to achieve a certain task is, I suppose, is vital to being able to get from A to B with the greatest success for everybody.
Assessments can be beneficial in assisting the tutor in understanding how well the students are developing through the program. They are also helpful for the student in setting clear goals for what they need to achieve.
It certainly is a backup for tutors. It gives them something to work towards or work against. Actually, so it's a monitoring. As she says, okay, we need to meet this criteria, these performance criteria. The student needs to have covered certain points in it, certain guidelines for that, the quality points, quantity points, for example. And it gives both the tutor and the student an idea or an ideal of what they need to be achieving or attaining or striving for.
A good use of assessment, there are three main forms of assessment. You've got diagnostic, and many educators don't do it, but it is really important. So diagnostic is where you come in and you assess where your student's level is when they start the course. And a lot of students have prior knowledge of this topic, so it would be good to just evaluate where they are. Then we have formative.
Okay, a formative assessment is actually forming an ideal and a picture through the program. And you're establishing an understanding of their abilities and assessment. A summative is at the end of the program, so you're summing it up and actually getting an idea of their overall learning, but at the end of the course or program.
But there are a lot of innovative ways in using all three assessments to actually help your learners get the most out of it. And it's important for tutors to remember that assessment is for learning. It shouldn't be the final point. And feedback on that assessment at the end of that is really valuable to the students.
I think when you're assessing a student on a task that you do want it to become behaviour rather than a one-off situation, you have to think beyond the square, and you take in every opportunity to see where the student is developing that skill or even the level of understanding of that skill. And sometimes even though the skill isn't performed 100% or the task isn't 100% correct, you can dig deeper into their underpinning knowledge and they can explain what went wrong and why it went wrong and what they would do the next time around. So assessment is very collective, it's very holistic, it's and it's happening all the time, and even to the point of casual conversations with the students about what we did yesterday in class and what we're going to do today and how did you find that particular task. And it almost comes down, in my opinion, to getting a gut feeling. They know it or they don't, they're grasping it or they're not.
Unit standards have been set out for certain criteria that the students need to complete certain tasks and within a category or performance criteria. And it sets a standard right across board, an equal playing field, so to speak, for all students. And depending on the level they're going from, for example, level 2, which we start at, is introductory unit standards. Then we're looking at level 3, which is basic. Then we look at level 4, which is like a more professional level cookery program. So unit standards is basically a way of saying, hey, this is a criteria you need to follow. These are the certain tasks or things you need to cover within that category or criteria, I should say.
When assessing against standards, make sure that your student, before coming to that assessment, whether it's a practical or a written, has had opportunity to practice a task, because often we want students to be competent when they come to that assessment, but if they haven't had opportunity to practice, to become familiar, because practice, the more they practice, the more it becomes a habit and the more comfortable and more confident they'll be at the assessment. So when assessing against standards, it is really important that you give students opportunity to get to that confident, competent level.